Hello.
Hello.
Buon pomeriggio. Good afternoon.
Yeah. We're waiting the interpreters and the chair.
Can you see me?
Yeah.
Do you have a good light?
Yeah, it's enough good.
Yes, and my volume also. I wanted you to check, please, the light and the volume and how to share my slide. I want to be able to control the slide, the PowerPoint. Can you see the...
Not yet, it's loading.
No.
Okay.
Can you see my...
It's 2 o'clock. Ok.
Excuse me?
Sì, beh, ho già messo in italiano. Perfetto. Sì. Assolutamente sì, ho già parlato precedentemente con la professoressa Pelaez, quindi ci siamo già accordati su come procedere. Grazie ancora. Allora, io direi che possiamo iniziare. Ringrazio tutti i partecipanti che si sono ripresentati a questa sessione plenaria e sono veramente contento e orgoglioso di poter presentare a questa sessione la professoressa Martha Pelaez, una professionista, una ricercatrice estremamente nota, ha un curriculum davvero notevole, professore ordinario di psicologia presso l'Università Internazionale della Florida, ed è davvero difficile immaginare di presentare un curriculum così lungo, e quindi faccio una scelta necessariamente parziale, ma credo che sia molto utile a spiegare un po' il lavoro che andrà a fare oggi. Ecco, Martha Pelaez è una donna, una professionista, una ricercatrice abituata a cogliere, a fronteggiare e superare le sfide. Lo ha fatto nella ricerca, si è impegnata con successo a ricercare come nascono e quindi come si possono modificare le interazioni tra madre e neonato, con particolare attenzione all'apprendimento sociale. Si è abituata a lavorare e a fronteggiare le sfide anche nell'ambito della clinica, perché riesce a trasformare le sue ricerche in una clinica di tutti i giorni, per costruire interventi a favore di bambini con autismo, con disabilità intellettiva o con altri disturbi del neurosviluppo, indicando che è necessario ed è possibile anche nella clinica di tutti i giorni mantenere un approccio, una mentalità da ricercatore. E la terza area in cui la professoressa Pelaez è allenata a fronteggiare le sfide è quella della divulgazione scientifica. Non solo perché è un'ottima oratrice, la sentiremo tra un attimo, ma perché ha il compito oggi, in solo 40 minuti scarsi, di comunicarci davvero tante informazioni e tanti esiti importanti dei propri lavori e dei lavori dei colleghi. Allora io la ringrazio ancora moltissimo, non le tolgo altro tempo, lascio la parola alla professoressa Martha Pelaez, che avrà una relazione dal titolo Apprendimento sociale nell'infanzia, interventi basati sull'analisi comportamentale. Prego, professoressa.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today. And I want to thank in particular Professor Paolo Moderato for having invited me, and Professor Nanni Presti, dear friends to me for many, many years. I would like to start with my objectives today. Today, I will provide some experimental illustrations on how operant conditioning and social reinforcement are essential to furthering our understanding of infant learning in particular infant social learning. And so I will talk about procedures like operant conditioning of infant vocalizations, joint attending, and social referencing. There are other phenomena I have studied, but we will not have the time today. However, I will volunteer to share my talk with any that desires the talk and the material and the references. So my second objective is to provide behavioral procedures and methodologies. More recently, we have implemented this methodology with children at risk of developing autism, very young children, given that they have siblings with autism, and other children with other developmental challenges, like very premature neonates. I will discuss intervention tactics as my last objective that can be implemented quickly and effectively using behavior analytic principles and procedures with infants at risk. So, what should you capture or learn at the end of this presentation? I would like to leave you with the essence of the infant phenomena, that learning phenomena that had been studied. For example, joint attending and social referencing, and the developmental progression of these repertoires. For example, we start with eye contact. In order to establish joint attention, we need to have eye contact or orienting response. And subsequently, once you establish joint attending, that is a prerequisite repertoire for social referencing. So on and so forth. Perspective taking, typically used now being studied from the perspective of relational frame theory, uses prerequisite cost or repertoires like the ones I'm going to be talking today. I will try to identify several behavioral markers for infants at risk. And in addition, the interventions that we use with reinforcement contingencies that are provided by the caregivers, typically the mothers, but also the fathers and the grandfathers or grandmothers. In general, I would like to talk about infant caregiver operant responses that have been targeted in our studies and the responses that we have investigated. By the way, this is a recent, I'm promoting a textbook that I recently published. We're very proud of this textbook. Gary Novak is the first author, myself and Genevieve de Bernardis. And this is a textbook that we are planning to translate into Italian. And we will give you more news on this later on. But what do we know so far? Well, we know many things, but with respect to related to my talk, I know that at birth, the caregiver provides the primary source for reinforcing stimuli for the neonate, the recently born neonate. So the feeding, the touch, the warming, all the sources of stimulation typically come from caregivers, the mother, the dad. Everything about the caregivers is a source of discriminative stimulus and reinforcing stimulus. It's a source of stimulus control. The auditory sounds, the voice, the visual, the smiles, the touch, the movement, the kinesthetic movement, all become evocative stimuli and reinforcing stimuli for the baby's learning the first operant responses. Now, of course, there are reflexes that occur before the operant responses, and we have talked about the transition between the reflex and the operant. So sucking response becomes an operant response, orienting, crying can become from a reflex to an operand in a form of mending. Smiling can occur originally very early on as a social reflex, and we know that smiles can become an operant response, same as vocalization, imitation, pointing, attending, and many other responses we have used as target behaviors. We know from research that infant learning then results from stimulus-response pairing, from conditioning, and also from imitation. And there's a lot of research that I have cited that is available to you from my laboratory and from Gewer's laboratory, and more recent with my graduate students and colleagues. So which are the operant responses then that we target? Head turning. Since the 1960s, we know Lipset did these studies. High amplitude sucking by evidence of the Casper and colleagues. Visual and auditory tracking of the infant. Gazing away as an avoidant response in infants at risk of autism. Kicking, crawling, smiling, crying, laughing, grasping, touching, pointing, reaching, moving away, vocalizing, grimacing, making faces, protesting, like in attachment and separation, tacting and mending, and naming, more recently bidirectional naming. Well, from Fergus Lowe and Pauline Horn, we started the bidirectional naming, more recently in the laboratory of Doug Greer and colleagues. Forming a stimulus equivalence, I have done some work on that, and I know Carmen Luciano as well. And of course, relating, as in relational frames. All of these are very important phenomena in infancy. We have 2 papers that might help in case you want to deep further your reading. Articles that describe operant conditioning procedures and the literature that I just mentioned. Let me go back to the caregiver. So imagine you have a caregiver that is interacting with the baby, and what is she doing, or he? What is the dad or the mom doing? They are providing sounds, a smile, touching, and talking. So there are many different sources of stimulation that concurrently occur. And what we have been trying to do is to study these sources by teasing apart the components of the package of stimulation, while at the same time studying them together. How do they function together as a source of reinforcement? Or what happens when you eliminate one? For example, touch. What happens if you interact with a child and you don't provide touch as a reinforcing stimuli? Would you obtain the same rate of responses? So a smile is very powerful as a reinforcer. When you block the smile, you get what we call the still face reaction of the infant to a parent who's not smiling. We have several studies on depression and maternal depression that show that mothers that are depressed do not smile as frequently, and therefore they are depriving the child of one of the richest sources of communication, which is the facial expression, the smile. Similarly with touch, the advantage of touch is that when you use touch, and particularly with depressed mothers are recommended to use touch, we have found that touch buffers the negativity of not being able to express facially with the smiles. And also we have used control procedures to time the motherese or parentese speech and the vocal imitation using control procedures that allowed us to separate the elicitation effects of the stimulation from the reinforcing effects of the vocal stimulation. This is very important, and Claire Paulson did these kinds of studies early in the 70s, where she uses control for elicitation procedures to determine the reinforcing efficacy of the vocal sounds made by the caregiver. So it is not so much how much you provide, which could be argued from the Hart and Risley sequence of study, but is when do you provide stimulation and for how long? Taking into account that immediacy of the stimuli is critical in the reinforcing efficacy. So these kinds of studies have been published, and there are other phenomena that I'm not going to delineate today that are critical, but that I want to list. Infant attachment, infant caregiver attachment, the problem of separation anxiety when infants develop insecure attachments to their parents. This has been very important in the, for us as developmental psychologists, because the explanations given in the mainstream psychology attribute the insecurity and security of attachment to, as clinical psychologists, following a model, a psychoanalytic model of that does not target the contingencies that are in effect. So there are other phenomena I am talking about today. It's like social referencing and joint attention that also we have been published and continue to study now with infants at risk. And a lot of research on infant vocal imitation and infant caregivers vocal imitation. So the infant vocal imitation as well as the caregivers vocal imitation. What are the characteristics or markers, one can say, of an infant that is at risk? It's at risk already by having 2 or 3 siblings, denoting autism characteristics. So we know very early on that these infants that's facing developmental challenges have minimum eye contact, start gazing away from the parents very frequently. They show infrequent smiles, a high level of fuzziness, and limited number of vocalizations, and they have trouble or challenges acquiring joint attending, and as well as referencing, which means following the signals of others about how to behave. This phenomenon of referencing occurs later on, around 9 months of age. But again, the prerequisite repertoires are extremely important. Now, of course, there's genetic factors and prenatal factors that are influencing or putting the child, making them more vulnerable to experience some of these behavioral limitations. But also problematic behaviors from the caregivers can influence the problem. And so we come from a contextualistic approach where everything is multiple determined, meaning there are a confluence of variables that are interacting concurrently that affect the child's development. So it's not the caregivers alone or genetic factors which play a significant role, but it's the genotypic, phenotypic interactions that are often, again, interacting concurrently. So you have caregivers that are emotionally inexpressive because of their own history or depressive symptomatology or negative mood, anxieties. They become disengaged. And some of the work I done with Tiffany Field and Scafidi and Pickens have shown that. So we developed interventions where we accelerate the intervention, the the withdrawn mothers are coached on how to interact, and the overwhelming mothers, so to speak, the mothers that provide a lot of stimulation and do not make pauses, then we coach them on how to refrain from overwhelming the kid with too much stimulation. And so this research has been reported, disengaged and authoritarian parenting. From a behavioral perspective, we know that unresponsive to the infant cues could be problematic, as well as intrusive, meaning too much and misplaced contingencies. Sidney Bijou used to say misplaced contingencies, and that captured my attention early on. What is misplaced contingencies? Well, we need to have a training protocol to actually train parents to place the contingencies in the appropriate timing. In the case of a caregiver engaging in eye contact or eye-to-eye contact with the neonate right after birth, we have found that it's critical to show other sources of stimulation besides the eye contact, like smile and touch. I want to make a note that around 2 to 3 months, infants begin scanning the faces. So developmental researchers have shown that they become fixated on the caregiver's eye. And now we have the technology that allows us to look at tracking where the infant is going to be looking on the face. Infants later diagnosed with autism exhibited a decline in eye fixation from between 2 to 6 months. There's evidence of that already. And based on the mainstream developmental literature, is that we decided to use those studies as a basis for some of our interventions. More recently, with Haley and Amy, we have done work with siblings of infants with autism, which are also already showing characteristics of autism, like gazing away, and have used the synchronized reinforcement procedure to bring that eye contact back. Of course, we look for indicators of aversiveness. If the eye contact is aversive to the child, we tried other sources of stimulation. In other words, we believe in assent. The babies cannot talk to us and tell us we don't want this, but we can read the signals of the child and then determine the intervention based on the baby's preferences, never imposing our own controlling procedures without determining what is the desired, so to speak, desired stimulation for the child, which will work better eventually if you target preferences by the child. And that's why one of the things I like about the synchronized reinforcement procedure is that it allows you to identify these preferences by the baby. So in this case, the adult experimenter, or it could be the caregiver in the naturalistic settings, smiles simultaneously while making eye contact. And it reinforces the duration of eye contact until the child desires not to make eye contact anymore. So if the child moves away or gazes away, the stimulation stops. The stimulation will reinstate once the child looks back again at the caregiver. So in this way, you can begin to add or subtract sources of stimuli, like you can eliminate auditory and just make eye contact and touch, or you can eliminate the smile and just use the touch and auditory. Or you cannot talk to the child and just use the touch and the smile. So there are combinations that you can use when you implement the synchronized reinforcement procedure. this is a touch is a very powerful. I have concentrated in auditory, vocal, and touch. My early studies were done with touch because I was also working with premature, preemie babies that were born of very low weight at birth. And we found in the studies led by Tiffany Field that the touch can actually, it's very beneficial because the kids who receive massage, babies who receive massage therapy using the protocols for neonates, very light touch, and we have a 15-minute massage protocol. And they gain weight faster, and they were dismissed from the hospital much earlier than the babies that did not receive the touch therapy. So that captured my interest, and I began to implement touch, using it as a reinforcer procedure, meaning timing the contingencies and following the target behaviors that we desire. Like in this case, the eye contact was the desired response. And we began that with normally developing kids. The synchronous touch then becomes the preferred procedure for us. It's kind of conjugate, but it's not really conjugate because the intensity of the stimulation does not vary. And the synchronized is the timing. As long as the response occurs, the reinforcement occurs. Imagine that you're driving a car. When you press the accelerator, the car moves. When you stop pressing, the car stops. So similarly, this is what I'm referring to by synchronized. As long as the child is providing the desired response, in this case, duration of eye contact, we provide the stimulation preferred by the child in a compound package of reinforcement. There are some citations here if you want to further your understanding of this procedure. Let me give you a little demo here, demonstration with this video, which reinforcement consisted of caregiver touching, providing auditory talking, motherly speech. The motherly speech is a high tone that we tend to use with babies, like, "Hi, baby, how are you? Oh my God." We use this high-pitched tone to capture the child's attention, and we use it contingently on the child making eye contact. So we have 6 ongoing studies right now or more that from single subject design to a little bit larger sample, where we use music or no music. We're trying to use fathers, mothers, grandparents, and use different variables. Here it is, a grandmother, myself, implementing touch.
From the armpits to the finger, and the fingers to the armpits, so your whole body's connected.
This child was making eye contact, and that's why the simulation continued. This child, by the way, his name is Ian. Let me show you some of the data. These are 11 babies. What you need to focus on this graph is the dark circles. The dark circles represent the percentage of eye contact made by infants in the condition that we use touch, versus the open triangles, which represent the stimulation that did not include touch, but only auditory and visual. You can see overall the mean, as we did a statistical analysis, because our sample power allowed us, and we find significant differences in the 2 treatments. And also in the single subject design, you can see a reduction on the response duration during the extinction period. The extinction period is very I could say almost disturbing to the child, because it becomes like a still face. And so we try to minimize the reversals this sign, but in this particular case, it was critical for us to do it. We got approval, and the absence of simulation was very short, and we noted immediately an elevation of grimacing and protesting and a reduction of eye contact. So that means that the lack of stimulation while you are facing a child could be quite aversive, or at least it suggests that. Now, interestingly, in this class, I put this graph here of a 2.5 month male to show that infants can also have B2A, to touch. So it's not that touch is permanently reinforcing. It depends on the level of satiation, or depends of how much touch the child has received earlier. These are important factors to study. Overall, across all infants, we saw the black circles. That means the touch being higher, producing higher response rates than the open triangles. Interestingly, when we compare different types of touch, one that had deeper pressure, we know that if the pressure is too deep, it's not as good, as well as if it's too light. You need to press enough to activate the receptors to produce different neurotransmitters, which are very critical for the release of the hormones. And that is another line of research where we did with the medical field in terms of the levels of cortisol, the levels of catecholamines, norepinephrine, epinephrine, a different level of analysis. In this particular research I'm reporting today, we are reporting on the topography of the stimulation, in this case intrusive touch, poking, tickling, versus rhythmic touch. And you can see in 12 infants, overall the mean response of eye contact was higher than in the, it was higher on the rhythmic touch, massage type rhythmic, that on the poking, tickling touch. From basic research, laboratory research, to apply interventions and practice, we know that we have implemented this synchronized reinforcement procedure. It uses the caregiver stimuli to effectively increase eye contact and vocal responses as well. So we have moved now to the vocal responses, not just the eye contact. We use recording, different cameras for recording. There's another one that I'm using now that hangs on in the neck, and we can capture directly the eye contact response and an iPad. It can be implemented in the home environments with a caregiver that is trained. These caregivers follow a protocol that we have generated, where we have first written instructions, then in vivo model, where the procedure is demonstrated, then allow them to role play while we provide feedback in the way that they are role playing, and then finally an in vivo action with feedback. The protocol also is available, and Jackie Carroll will be happy to send it, as well as myself. The procedures during baseline, the mother provides eye contact, the infant makes eye contact, and then the mother presents the neutral facial expression. That is because it's baseline, which later on in a single subject design can be the equivalent to an extinction phase. During the intervention, the mother provides eye contact, makes eye orienting towards the child, ensuring the eye contact. When the child makes the eye contact, then the mother touches the infant while smiling and providing either vocalizations that are random or parentis speech. You can also use the stimulation by targeting consonants and vowels and by beginning to shape phonics in the child. There are some considerations that need to be highlighted. We need to reduce the distractions, consider the time of the day. The session should not be longer than 30 minutes because it depends on the child's age, but with a neonate, you won't have more than 20 minutes for the child before they fall asleep or begin crying because they have their needs to be met. But so prior to the session that you implement, make sure that you withhold the reinforcement. If you're going to use an object or a smiling or touch, if it's too much stimulation before the session, then you probably won't be as effective if you're testing the preferences procedures. Here you have a child that is an older kid that it's child at risk. The motherly stimulation is meant to evoke the infant eye contact, and then it's also meant to reinforce. It's looking for eye contact. Now child makes eye contact.
I do. Look at the jewel. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, cool. No.
Sorry, it's moving.
No.
The parent is waiting for the child to turn and to make eye contact, and at that moment is providing parent ease. Let's see if this is another example.
Here's your nose. Nose.
It's evoking.
Oh, you birdie. You
So a baby who's probably hasn't done or emitted vocalizations begins to emit vocalizations, and at some point you can get a very, I would say, high rate of vocalizations. I want you to see this video. It's a 2-month-old, and it's a male, a baby male. The mother is providing contingent vocal imitation, and what I found very interesting is that the baby learned very quickly, but not only the baby learned, but the baby's, it seems to me, that is correcting the mother for not doing the procedure right. So here it is how we do learn from infants. I want you to pay attention to how the baby is correcting the mother. Well, I perceive it as correcting. Finally. She got it. Some parents, sometimes parents need to learn, and I think the best teachers are the kids themselves. In a group design, we have, you know, this whole argument that is coming in the literature, whether single subject research versus group designs. I don't see why we need to argue. We can do both. We can do single subject designs with larger samples, and then we have the beauty of being able to have the single subject methodology, but with larger samples, it can become a mixed design. So what you have here in these groups, we have an N of 45 and 48, and we have baseline, contingent reinforcement, non-contingent reinforcement, contingent reinforcement, and again, non-contingent reinforcement. This is a true repeated measures reversal. Actually, the non-contingent condition becomes almost like the non-reversal, because we know that non-contingent reinforcement is reducing the rate of vocalizations. Now, it's important in this basic research to control for the density of stimulation, and that's why you have two bars. One bar is the white bar, is the one where the mother imitates the vocalizations, as you saw in the video. The other bar is the mother's speech. I have so much to show you, and I have so much to tell you on the derivations of these procedures, where now we begin to find that the infant also learns to imitate after having seen the mother imitating him or her. And our last line of research is on joint attention and social referencing. I know I won't have time to present all of the data with infants at risk, but in this case, we have 3 babies that are siblings of infants at risk. And what we found is that after implementing some of these methodologies, we found that the infants at risk also respond better to vocal imitation compared to the non-contingent control condition and compared to baseline. This is very critical because now we are extrapolating and transferring the research methodologies with normally developing infants to infants that are already showing characteristics of being showing delays in their onset of the responses. So the general findings of early interventions with infants at risk is that they decrease the likelihood of problem behavior like gazing away, low vocalizations, and they increase the eye contact, the vocalizations, the joint attending responses, and the social referencing. And I want to leave you with one slide at the end, which is the social referencing. Training joint attention and social referencing in infants at risk is critical. We have procedures where the infant is prompted to look at the mother and the mother makes facial expressions, whether it's a fearful face like in the right side or a happy face. And these expressions will signal the child how to respond, whether to approach an object that is being presented and cover from this puppet theater or not. And this is very important because once you show that the kids can learn through differential conditioning, discrimination procedures, then you are demonstrating not only that you need these conditional discrimination procedures in order to establish a repertoire that is fundamentally necessary for communication. Referencing is fundamental for early communication. It's the first form of knowing how to understand the signals of others in the environment. And with that, I want to thank you all for having been here, listening to this talk. And I hope you enjoy it. And if you have questions or you need anything from me, please do not hesitate to contact me. I have information here. This is my address, and this is my faculty at FIU, Florida International University website. Thank you.
Grazie professoressa Pelaez, è stato davvero un intervento magistrale, superata anche questa sfida, direi in maniera eccellente, la ringrazio davvero. Ed è sempre un piacere vedere come la ricerca di base poi si trasforma in una clinica di tutti i giorni, e quindi di quella mentalità da ricercatore e da clinico che sta insieme è davvero fondamentale per garantire prospettive di sviluppo diverso ai bimbi con autismo e disabilità intellettiva in generale. Quindi davvero abbiamo apprezzato moltissimo il suo lavoro. Peccato che non ci sia il tempo per approfondire, ma credo che avremo sicuramente grandi e altre occasioni per proseguire questo questo confronto. Così come la ringraziamo per la grande generosità, per le slide e per tutti i riferimenti che ci ha lasciato. La ringraziamo ancora e invitiamo poi tutti gli uditori a utilizzare i riferimenti che la professoressa Pelaez ci ha lasciato e a muoversi nelle 2 diverse sessioni parallele che sono state preparate proprio per la giornata di oggi. Buona giornata a tutti.
Però mi devi
Grazie,
dare un
professoressa Pelaez.
minuto, mi devi dare un minuto per
Paolo.
salutare Marta, nostra vecchia amica, vecchia nel senso da molti anni. Hi Marta.
Yes,
You look
thank you
beautiful
so
as
much,
usual.
Paolo and Francesca, my dear friends.
Yes,
And to
we always,
Italy.
yeah. When you come back to Italy to visit us, we are looking always for your visit. Thank you very much for
I'm
your.
looking forward. Thank you for inviting me. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Okay.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you, Serafino. Simon.
Thank you very much, Martha. Congratulations for your presentation. Very, very nice. Thank you.